Hi, it's Deborah Carter here from Preparation Tech. Today we have another exciting interview because we are talking with Danielle Geathers. And if you don't know who she is, you should be, because Danielle is a third-year engineering student at MIT, and she's also recently been elected as the first ever female and Black president of MIT's student government. Now, she's got all kinds of things to share with us, so I want to just hand it over to you. Welcome, Danielle. Please tell us about yourself and what you do.
Hi, thank you for having me. Like you mentioned, my name is Danielle. I'm a rising third year at MIT studying mechanical engineering with a concentration in product design. I'm actually doing a minor in African and African American studies. I was born and raised in Miami, Florida. So I grew up in the warmth, and then I moved up to Boston to be in the cold. But yeah, I love MIT, and I'm excited for your questions.
Great, great. You were recently named as the first Black female president of MIT and the student government. And I just wanted to ask you, so how did it happen? Why did you choose to run? And what are you hoping to do in that position?
Yeah, so when I came onto campus for MIT as a freshman, I really wanted to make change. I joined the Black Student Union. I was really involved with initiatives there. I joined like 3 out of the 5 committees they had. And I just didn't see student government as a way to make change. Our student government historically hasn't been visible, has been mostly white, has done a lot of work with admin, but hasn't really done any major initiatives for the student body. So I really didn't see it as, oh, I should join this place to make change. I ended up joining just because there was a student support and wellness committee that I was passionate about the work they were doing. So I joined in that way. And then I became officer on diversity. And once I was at the higher levels of the government, I was like, oh, wow, we actually get a really big say in what MIT does, which is a really good benefit that a lot of schools don't have. So then once I saw the potential for impact and then also the shortcomings in that nobody knew about this potential for impact, I really saw a vision for making it more visible and inclusive. So I wanted to run.
And are there any specific themes or topics that you want to specifically address in your tenure as the president?
Yeah, definitely. So diversity, equity, inclusion has always been like a priority for the Institute, but it was always like number 5 on a list of like 10 things versus like actually number 1 or 2. So I'm excited to really make it a priority and kind of show what that means in terms of thinking about it in every single initiative you do and really thinking about where you put your money and how that affects things down the line. So I'm really excited. I think one thing we do is we still celebrate Columbus Day, which even Massachusetts as a state and Cambridge as a city have changed to Indigenous Peoples Day, but it's just like MIT's behind, and the bureaucracy of an institution is really just like limiting our quick changes on easy things. So that's one quick thing I want to change. On top of that, like I mentioned, our student government hasn't been visible. So a lot of the work I'm doing is like Instagram, making it cool, making our Facebook cool, because it's really important that you can connect to your constituents. Because if you can't, like, they won't know what you're doing. You don't know what they want. And it's just not a good way to govern.
Absolutely. So in front of me, I have this articulate, intelligent woman. Tell us how you got to this point. Take us back to your childhood. What were you interested in as a child? And what were your hobbies? And what did you do for extracurricular activities?
Yeah, so I was a very active child. I think I'm blessed in that I'm an only child and I have a single mom. So it's always been that one-on-one relation. So I had a lot of attention given to me, and I was able to do a lot of what I wanted. My mom is also a lawyer, so she's really passionate about education. She took me to the courthouse with her, so I actually grew up like going to the courthouse and like ordering bagels and walking around by myself. But on top of that, like my mom was just really into all those like child books, like Baby Beethoven. I also like recently had a flashback where I remember she used to like hide things around the house and then like give me a treasure hunt sheet. So like for a couple of years, every morning I woke up, I have like a small treasure hunt. So this is like when I'm like 3, 4, 5, like I was just going around like reading and like trying to come up with those clues. And I think that really affected the person I am today, just in terms of problem solving and having curiosity, and kind of getting comfortable not knowing the answers, but then like depending on myself to find the answers. So I really think most of it is contributed to my mom. Additionally, I went to like a predominantly white private school, so although it had its shortcomings, I also definitely had a lot of opportunities in terms of extracurricular activities. My mom would give me the large packet of things to sign up for, and I would just like check what I wanted to do, and it would like rotate every so months. So I played probably every sport you can imagine. And then as I got older, I specialized in soccer. So I was actually recruited to MIT, and I played soccer my freshman year there.
And what other kinds of extracurricular? Did you do robotics? Did you do anything to do with technology?
No, I took, so I probably did a couple like science lab classes, like cute kid stuff, nothing like robotics or anything that intense. I think my sophomore year, my school actually had a class called Robotics and Engineering Design. So I took that, but like I'm really bad at robots today, and it was good to learn engineering and kind of learn how to work a 3D printer. But that was in school. I never really did any extracurriculars on that track.
And I've got a question related to that, because a lot of kids I hear from, especially those going from high school to university, they're so terrified that they don't have all of the background to take some of the courses in university. Is that a legitimate concern, or do you learn a lot during your classes, especially the first year?
Yeah, I kind of understand where they're coming from, but I think universities need to prepare to have students coming from every single type of background. So specifically at MIT, we really have what's called like a core curriculum, and there's a base that you have to take no matter like who you are. And I think that really helps to equalize the playing ground. And I think, to my understanding, most universities do that. So I wouldn't worry. I mean, there are some people coming from backgrounds in which they like my school didn't have like AP physics, and there's a bunch of other schools that didn't have like certain science courses, but people get into MIT and they teach us there. So I think, if anything, it's the university's job to make sure you guys are at the level you should be.
Awesome. So tell us about the admission process, because a lot of people, like for example, I'll talk about myself. When I was ready to go to university, I really had no clue that going to MIT was even a possibility, because the teachers didn't tell me this. My single mother didn't tell me this. And I did not really understand the whole admissions process, especially when going to a university overseas or a prestigious university like MIT. Can you kind of give us your experience about this whole admission process? What do you do to get admitted to MIT?
Yeah, so it actually used to be way more complicated when I applied. We've simplified it. I actually sit on the committee for undergraduate admissions and financial aid. So I'm pretty well versed in the process. But before, we had to do what's called subject tests, so it's called ACT2s, and you had to do a math and a science. But this year we actually voted to get rid of them, just because in terms of racial equity, only 1,200 Black students score on what the SAT calls high achieving, and that's like simply for the normal SAT, let alone this like SAT2, very like elite, like nobody knows what it is, very hard to study for test. So we think that was a major barrier standing in the way of us diversifying our admissions process. So we actually voted to get rid of that. So I'm excited for that. But in general, MIT is not on the Common App. So you actually have to know you want to go to MIT and do their separate application, which is on their website. You don't have a long, a long answer essay question. It's like 5 short answers, 250 words or less. So you really have to, a lot of people spend a lot of time. It's typically harder than the long answers because you only have 250 words to respond to something about your entire life. But it really allows them to quickly weed out kind of the person they're looking for, just in terms of what you're thinking about and like your potential impact on the world. So it's 5 short answers. Then you need 2 recommendations. You need to take the SAT or ACT. We got rid of subject tests. You usually report your transcripts. And then the really cool thing that I like about MIT is you can only list 5 of your extracurriculars. So I think specifically in America, it's really told like do everything you can, like really sign up for all these clubs because you'll need it for college. But MIT's whole mentality is from your top 5 extracurriculars, we should be able to tell if you're the type of person we want. And I really like that idea of breadth or depth versus breadth. So, yeah.
Awesome. And what were your top 5 extracurriculars, if you remember?
Yeah. So mine were pretty dramatic. I don't think this is a good basis, but since I knew I only had 5, I really made sure I had 5 to do. So my first one was I taught the summer after my junior year, I taught a sports science class at a local park. ESPN has these sports science videos. They're really cool. They'll talk about like football, soccer, basketball, and they'll like zoom in on a time in the sport, like an event, like maybe someone hit someone, and they'll talk about all the physics. So they like actually go up and use cameras to like measure the angles, measure the velocity, and then they'll like talk about it and like zoom out and talk about broader physics topics. I used to think it's so cool, and I loved to watch them at hotels when I was younger. So I was like, Miami, Florida is actually the biggest city for American football. We have a bunch of Pop Warner leagues. A bunch of kids start when they're like 2 years old and then go off to play in the NFL. So it's really big versus education isn't prioritized at all. So I thought it'd be really helpful if I could focus on these football videos and then also tie it to science and math, that when they're in class just sitting there, hopefully they have some kind of interest and they can understand the relation. So that was my main thing. For a couple of weeks of the summer, I went and I taught them that. So that was my first activity. Then my second one was I wrote a children's book. I never published it, but it was called like Don't Touch My Hair. And it's about my experience growing up in a predominantly white environment and kind of the like simple microaggressions and othering that you experience. The kind of idea was I really felt alone growing up. But then like when I got into like college or even high school, I found out that like a bunch of other Black girls were doing the same thing. And I think just growing up and understanding that like I wasn't this strange person in the world dealing with this, it would have helped. And I also thought like it would be helpful for younger girls to kind of expect these things. I think it's unfortunate that we have to deal with it, but I think if you are prepared to deal with it, it's a little better than kind of being surprised when everyone is constantly doing this to you. So it was like a anecdotal thing. I talked about like little things, like people touching my braids, saying they felt rough, or things like that. So that was my second major one. This is getting a little rough. I think my third one was the community service board at my high school. They had a group of 5 students who would kind of go through everyone's hours and help promote community service. So that was another big one. And then the other 2 were probably, I was president of like the Science Honor Society. So that's a more typical high school thing. And then one other one is probably like that.
Great. So you were busy. It always makes me marvel that you have to get good grades, but you also have to be so active in your community and showing your leadership skills, which I think really rounds you off as a person. Let's go back to your experience as a student at MIT. You're studying mechanical engineering with a minor in product design. Tell us about that. Why did you choose these 2 areas to study? And what typically does that look like in terms of study?
Yeah, so before I went to MIT, I was trying to figure out what major I wanted to be. I've kind of always been torn between STEM and humanities. My mom's a lawyer. She loves humanities. So growing up, I kind of always loved STEM. But I also love humanities, so kind of like balancing that out. So when I thought about what I wanted to study, I kind of going back and forth between maybe political science or maybe engineering. One fear I had was, as I mentioned, my school didn't have AP physics. So I was a little worried just in terms of my technical skills and kind of what I knew about engineering to go and make that my major. Luckily at MIT, you don't need to declare until your sophomore year. So I had some time, but I decided that I wanted to do biomedical engineering before I had enrolled. And then I figured out that MIT doesn't have that as a major. It's kind of ironic. One of the best engineering schools doesn't have one of the major engineering disciplines. But what they do instead predominantly is biological engineering. But that's way more on a cellular level, looking in a microscope all day. So I actually got to do a summer camp program at MIT after my junior year. And one of the just day sessions for 2 hours was to look at C. elegans, like these tiny worms in a microscope, and just to look at their DNA or something. And I looked in the microscope for 10 minutes and I was like, I can't do this. So I very quickly was pivoting, talking to people, what can I do? What can I do? And the kind of feedback I got was okay, if you're not too much in the biology side of biomedical engineering, the other alternative people do is at MIT, you can be a straight mechanical engineer, or you can do like mechanical engineering flex. So when you do flex, you don't have to take as many really intense physics classes, and you supplement it with a concentration. So what people do is they do 2A, which is mechanical engineering flex, and then they can pick something. So biomedical people tend to pick 2A medical devices. So it's mechanical engineering with medical devices. And then that kind of gives you the traditional biomedical fit. Once I figured out that I could do flex, I was like, oh, I can do anything. So I kind of really decided like this product design, because I think my push to biomedical wasn't as much my interest in like the medical field. To me, thinking about what was in everyday applications, it was like medical stuff, because it just seemed like easier to wrap your head around versus like cars and trains and buildings. Like, I don't know, it seemed much easier to me. But then when I realized that like right now I'm working at Procter & Gamble, like razors, I'm working at Gillette. So like those are even more everyday materials. So I think I really just wanted to affect kind of everyday life and do products that people deal with all the time.
So interesting and useful, because sometimes designers and engineers want to do the big stuff, but those little things reach billions of people. So that's really important. Question: what's the mindset and the characteristics of someone who thrives at MIT? What are the personal characteristics that you see in the students, your fellow students, and the people that you're interacting with at the university?
That's a good question. I think there's probably honestly like 3 very distinct types of people that thrive. But I'll talk about the most general type. I think that it's really important to not have your self-esteem tied with your academic performance. I think some people at MIT get away with it because they're geniuses, but I'm not at that level at all. I think I was lucky to grow up playing soccer, doing a lot of extracurriculars, giving back to my community. So my own idea of self-worth was never really related to what grades I got. So although I enjoyed getting good grades, like if I didn't get a good grade, like I was a little disappointed, but it had nothing to do with how I really reflected on myself as a person. And I think going to school at MIT, everyone has imposter syndrome right out the gate, right? Like it's MIT. Nobody thinks they're good enough for MIT. And I think especially given how rigorous it is initially, it's not it's shocking to people, but most upperclassmen, it's not shocking to hear that a freshman gets a 50. Like it's traditional. Like if you can get over a B, it's very you're very good. You must understand it. You probably took it before. So I think that just understanding that you probably won't get an A, and that it's a group of people where everyone is used to being the top of your class, but now you're in a different group of people. So I think the most important mindset is that you're here to learn, not here to like get all A's. I think historically, if you get all A's for the most part, you're too comfortable. So I think a really good mindset is that you're going to college to grow rather than to like succeed. And I know like succeed is a little like tainted, so it might be confusing why I'm saying not to succeed, but it's because you don't need to like be successful in everything you do at school. It's important to grow and change and learn and know. It's really good to know what you're not good at, so later in life you know what you need others for. So I think a mindset is that you won't be good at everything. You'll be really bad at some things, but you will be good at some things. And you'll meet people who are really good at the things you're bad at. So that's helpful. I would say like an open and authentic mindset.
Great. Funny you should say that, because I just, the interview that we are featuring now for Preparation Tech is with Babusi Anyoni, who is an African design strategist and an innovator. And he's completely self-taught. So he comes from a humble background. He ended high school and he immediately went to work because his mother couldn't afford his school fees. And he said, my mother was a teacher and she let me drop math because I wasn't good at it. And, that's a huge risk. But he said she had such confidence that the stuff that I was good at, I would find my way. And so that's what you're saying too. You don't have to be good at everything. Of course, math helps at MIT, no doubt. But yeah, you have to know what you're good at and what you enjoy. And sometimes you got to let go of the stuff that you struggle with, right? So that's really super interesting to know. Talking about struggle, I want to come back to this whole issue of diversity and inclusion. So these are really important things to you. I mean, your whole election campaign as the president was about this stuff. What's happening at MIT, and what needs to happen for more Black people and people of color to choose to go to MIT to study and get into the STEM community and achieve great things?
Yeah, that's a question I had. Coming into college, kind of wondering why the numbers were so low and kind of what we could do. I actually created a program called Talented 10, which is aimed at increasing the Black female matriculation at MIT. So that kind of came about because one thing I found out my sophomore year, so this past year, was that Black female matriculation was going down. So it went up dramatically in the 60s. And then honestly, 80s to 90s, it remained constant. And now I think we're decreasing just because our peers, Stanford, Harvard, and the other Ivies are just like really pushing out. Like they have a community. I think historically, the Black students we've been able to get are great and amazing, but they really, really care about academics versus that community building. So just in terms of MIT being really student independent, whenever admitted students come to visit, whatever you see is most likely student planned versus a lot of Ivy League schools that have all these offices which are planning these events. So if you're just comparing an event thrown by a Harvard admissions officer who's paid and all day this is their work versus a student who probably had a test that day and is just trying to welcome an admitted student, it just is comparing apples to oranges. So I think that's one problem we've had specifically with Black female recruitment. Our Black female population, although it's strong, it hasn't been that visible. And then additionally, as I mentioned earlier, the subject test and just other barriers to entry in terms of a lot of people, we're not on the Common App. So a lot of people don't know where to find our application. It's not something you can just stumble upon and check a box. You have to be really passionate and really intentional about applying. So that's something else I'm working on. But I think I created Talented 10 because I thought, all the Black women at MIT have gone through the admissions process and been successful. We can very clearly take some time out of our day to help students applying, kind of give them our tips and tricks, what we found successful. We decided to start it with juniors in high school so we'd have more time to kind of shape their trajectory. And then also walk them through the complete college admissions process. And then two, if they have someone they feel close with, it's like a pairing one-on-one program. If they have someone they feel close with, then they're more likely to choose MIT over our peers like Harvard and Stanford, which we have historically lost students to in terms of yield. And then we actually raised money to fly them up. So we were supposed to fly up the 10 girls in March, but COVID-19 happened, so we had to cancel it. And it looks like we won't be allowed to have guests in the fall. So unfortunately, that is ruined for this cohort, but we've done a lot of online webinars. So in all, I think the whole story is just that diversity will be like strifed as long as a lot of institutions call themselves a meritocracy. I think that's something we're dealing with at MIT, kind of just ignoring the barriers that people do deal with, even though if we have the idea that like everyone's equal, like that's not true in terms of systemic oppression. So I think it's really important to be intentional about what barriers there are to entry at an institute.
Absolutely, absolutely. You have experience, you have perspective, you are representing Black females. What advice and what tips would you give to the adults that influence whether children actually go into STEM or not, in terms of how can we engage kids better around technology specifically so that they're interested in studying and also having careers in tech?
Mm-hmm. So I think it's kind of like how I thought about my sports science class. I kind of mentioned my like inability to succeed with robots. And I think if early on I was taught that STEM is robots, I wouldn't have done it. I think it's really important. I think a lot of people think of STEM as like very technical things that like have not a large application to what you deal with in everyday life. And I think I'm coming to understand kind of even how much science, technology, engineering, and math is in every single thing you touch or experience. So specifically for like me, it would have been really helpful if adults around me kind of pulled those together earlier. I did not understand that until high school, college. I think I was lucky to stumble into engineering and kind of fall in love with it. But had I been a lot more robotics, girls who code, I personally hate to code. I understand how beneficial it is, but if to me engineering was projected as coding and robotics, it's not something that best suits me. So I think it's important to explain it and kind of open people's worlds. But I think even now, a lot of what you hear is all about coding and robotics versus how much STEM affects math. Like we have sports simulations, or like what I'm saying about razors, or even like drop testing. Like there's a lot of really cool stuff that's very dynamic and kind of easy to understand for a lot of people who like aren't that interested in technical things, that I think could be better illustrated.
Wow. So that's really interesting, seeing the connections between maybe things that kids are passionate about and these STEM applications are really super important. Danielle, this has been a fantastic interview. Folks, this is Danielle Geathers. Watch her, watch the space, because I have complete faith that you're going to do some awesome things. You're already doing some awesome things, but I'm really looking forward to following your career. Thank you so much for this interview. And like I said, I'll be watching out for you and also your important work around diversity and inclusion at MIT. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Great.